So I've got the wonderful task of introducing my old mate, Akashamitra, which is a delight. So I first met him back in probably around 2008, I think, around then anyway, when he was living in East London in a mixed Buddhist community, which included Saravantu as one of the occupants and a few other folk and some crazy cats. And I was straight away struck by his warmth and friendliness. He's a really, really warm, friendly, positive chap. And he's very caring. He's got a big heart and he's very affirming of others. When he rejoices in someone's merits, it's wonderful to behold. And he's very good at picking out people's positive qualities and very quick to affirm them. He works for the Karuna Trust as a program officer, a program manager, I should say. Which I'm sure he'll mention in his talk this evening. And I think most of you probably know, but for those who don't, the Karuna Trust is a Triratna charity that works in South Asia. And it exists to end caste-based discrimination and poverty and inequality. And I know he's really passionate about that work. He's been doing it for quite a while now. And I was fortunate enough to do a fundraising appeal for Karuna with Akashamitra. Back in 2019, actually largely down to his persuasion and his enthusiasm. He managed to rope me in, must have get much against my better judgment in some ways, the thought of door knocking, but there we go. But we had a great time, actually. It was one of my highlights was living with him. So we lived together for 6 weeks. We shared a room. There was 5 of us all together. And I've got very, very fond memories of that time being with Akashamitra, and it really sort of affirmed we deepened our friendship, and he was a real positive influence on that community and on me. And one of the delights was each evening we'd cycle together out to our respective patches because we were door knocking quite near to each other. So we'd set off on our bikes, and I often had a bit of a heavy heart because the thought of spending the evening door knocking didn't always fill me with joy. And he was very good at uplifting my spirits. And then we'd meet up at the end of the evening and we'd have a bit of a debrief and cycle home. And those are some of my highlights of that appeal, actually, is those bike rides with Akashamitra. So that was great. Yeah, and I'd also say he's got a very bright, clear mind. He's very sharp. He's a bright cookie. And he's very dedicated to teaching around the LBC. That's where his main sangha is, and he does a lot around there as well as working full time for Karuna. So he's very committed. He's also a bit of a hip dude. He's a bit urban. He likes his flat whites, and he's been a DJ in a former life. I think he still does a bit of DJing. I mean, I remember back when we lived together, he'd be cooking lunch, listening to this really obscure, hip, cool, funky music, grooving away in the kitchen. So he's a bit of a groover, a bit of a hipster. He made me feel like a bit of a country bumpkin. So he's an absolute delight. He was ordained back in 2013, and his name, Akashamitra, well, it means friend of infinite space. So, and I'm sure we're in for a bit of a treat this evening. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Akashamitra.
Thank you very much, Abhayanara. Really lovely to be introduced by you. Thank you very much. I feel like I could spend the next 5 minutes sort of rejoicing in you, but I'll start with what with what I'm going to say instead. But thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. So lovely to see you all, and lovely to be sort of virtually part of the Shrewsbury Sangha this evening. When I've been to Shrewsbury in person and visited the centre, I've really, really enjoyed it. So I was looking forward to this evening, and yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's really, really lovely to be here. So yeah, when Saravantu got in touch with me and asked me about doing an evening at Shrewsbury, and she told me that the subject of the series was living a Dharma life, well, I just really wanted to take the opportunity to talk about Karuna and talk about the work that we do. So some of you might be familiar with Karuna and might know a little bit about the work we do, but I'm going to say a bit more about it this evening. Not so much in a general sense, but partly from a kind of personal point of view. I want to share some stories and talk about the connections that I have with the work and some of the people in India, and talk a bit about what's been happening over the last year or so, and maybe try and expand on that a little bit and say what that means really in terms of being a Buddhist, and what the work means in terms of spiritual practice. But it's very, very hard for me to separate out my life as a Buddhist from working for Karuna. It's an incredibly important part of my life, as it is for many, many people. So there are about 25 of us work there, most of us on a full-time basis. And yeah, and we're all working together as Buddhists. Most of us are from the Triratna Buddhist community, and a couple of other people from other Buddhist sanghas. And we're working together explicitly as Buddhists and trying to work and bring our Buddhist values into our work. So I'll just say a little bit about Karuna kind of generally, and a bit about me personally. And then what I'm going to do is I'd like to show you some images, and I'd like to kind of talk a bit about Karuna using these images to illustrate what I'm talking about. So yeah, as I said, Karuna, well, we've been around since the early 80s. So I think Karuna was founded in about 1980. And so we've been around a very long time. And as Abhayanara said, essentially what we do is, the easiest way to think about it is we fundraise in the UK, and we fund projects in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And those projects work around three sort of thematic areas, which are education, access to meaningful livelihoods, and work with women and girls. And we don't deliver any work ourselves, but we fund projects which are run by extremely dedicated individuals, people who really give their life to helping to end the suffering of people that are extremely marginalized, and people that are suffer from tremendous economic inequality and hardship and discrimination. And those people, so just out of interest, who has been to India here? Who's familiar with India? I know a few of you have. Okay, and a few others as well. Yeah. So those of you that have been to India will know a little bit about India, and those of you that haven't, you may know about the caste system, which is a kind of a system of, well, I guess you could call it a system of graded inequality, really, where people are born into a particular strata of society, and they're born into a particular sort of level. And some people are sort of so low down on that hierarchy that they were formerly regarded as untouchable, which means that people from sort of higher castes, to even touch somebody would be regarded as polluting. So people, people would be excluded. They're not allowed to live near the higher caste people. They're not allowed to drink from the same well. They're not allowed the same job opportunities, the same educational opportunities. And the projects that we work with work to lift those people out of that kind of discrimination through education and giving people access to meaningful work and so on. I personally have been working for Karuna for about 8 years, and I started working for Karuna pretty much as soon as I was ordained. So all of my life as an order member has been working for Karuna, and it's felt like those two things have worked together in a very, very beautiful harmony. It's really sort of given my life in the order a focus. And out of that focus has grown some very, very beautiful connections and a tremendous amount of fulfillment, really. But before I started working for Karuna, I already had a link with India. So I lived and worked in India when I was in my mid-20s. So I've always worked in the charity sector. And I always did sort of charity project management, basically. So I worked for a long time with disability charities, also did a lot of work with older people. And when I was in my mid-20s, I was working for a charity called L'Arche, where you live and work with people with learning disabilities. And I was living in Calcutta, and basically living in a community with ex-street children with learning disabilities. And I did that for a year. So I worked for that charity for 3 years in Liverpool and a year in Calcutta. And that year for me was a sort of a pivot point in my life. My father had died when I was 24. And then when I was 25, I went to live and work in Calcutta. I still quite don't know what I was doing, actually, like to make that decision to go and live and work in Calcutta. And I don't think I'd been outside of Europe at the time. Didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but it was a tremendously transformative experience for me. And I sort of fell in love with India, and I fell in love with Calcutta. And I've been going back there ever since, really. I was going back regularly before I came to Karuna. And now, as I'll show you in a moment, one of the projects that I work closely with is based just outside of Calcutta. So there's a kind of a lovely kind of arc to the story. Yeah, so maybe that's enough about just sort of generally and a little bit about me. And what I want to do is kind of show you some pictures, and that will help me to kind of narrate what I want to talk about. So I'm going to share my screen with you and hope that this goes okay. Okay. Can you all see that okay? Yeah, great. Okay, excellent. So, this is our logo, and I really like this. I really like that image of the lotus unfolding, because I think, as you'll see from what I'm going to talk about, I think it's a very, very apt symbol for Karuna. And the first thing that I want to do is introduce you to two people that well, one of whom I know quite well. The young woman on the right is a young woman called Jaya. And I've met her probably half a dozen times, and I get regular updates on how she's doing. And she's part of a project that Karuna funds, which is called Nishta in West Bengal. And the reason why I wanted to show you this photo is that this photo was taken on my last trip to India, which was February 2020. And at the time, I had no idea that it would be years before I would get back to India. Obviously, I haven't been back to India since then. When I left at the end of that trip, I assumed, the project was going very, very well. And I assumed, I usually spend about 2 to 3 months in India each year, visiting the various projects that I work with. And I assumed that I'd be back later that year, and I would see Jaya and Rupa on the left, probably again at that time. And I had no idea that it would be a very, very long time before I saw them again. So Jaya is part of this, one of the projects that Nishta runs, and the project is to retain girls in education. So girls dropping out of school is a big problem in West Bengal. It's a big problem all over India, and particularly in rural areas of West Bengal where the project works, it's a huge issue. So girls can drop out of school. Sometimes they only get 2 or 3 years of schooling. And often girls will drop out of school by the age of 10 or 11, and sometimes they're married off when they're not much older than that. They're married off at age 11 or 12. And what the project does is, at any one time, they've got 1,000 girls enrolled in this project, and they put them into groups, and they form these groups, which are called girls' squads, which are very, very sort of spirited young women that get given lots of leadership training. And they support each other to stay in school. And the mothers and their families are kind of trained and given all the practical and economic assistance that they need to support their daughters to stay in school as well. So that instead of dropping out of school at age 11 or 12 or getting married at the same sort of age, like often a girl would be expected to get married at age 11, 12, 13, and she'd be expected to have children as soon as she hits puberty. One of the things that's really struck me about this project is often I meet the mothers of these girls, and they look not much older than the girls themselves. And the the life for a woman in India when she gets married that young is not a pleasant one. So it's not like the idea of marriage in this country. It's essentially domestic slavery, and women are expected to stay in the home, and they're expected to be subservient to their husbands. There are high rates of domestic violence. And if a girl can be educated and her confidence can be built, then her life will be completely different. And I think you can see this just by looking at these two young women. You know, you can kind of see something of the spirit of that on their faces. So that's Jaya and Rupa. And this is their girls group. So this is the girls squad. And all of the girls are punching the air and they're shouting, let me remember this now. I think it's, we will not get married young. We will choose who to marry. We'll choose when to get married, and we'll choose where we live when we get married. And they're shouting this at the end of one of their meetings. So you can see this is another gathering of the girls on the same day. And so all of these girls here come from very, very poor, economically very poor backgrounds. And all of the girls here and all of the girls in the project, their parents will be what are called daily wage laborers. So what that means is their parents will not have fixed regular employment. So they'll be doing kind of casual work, which means that maybe 10 days in the month, maybe 12 days in the month, they'll be given a day's work, and it will be doing some very, very menial, very badly paid work. Like for the men, it's casual work on building sites as laborers, agricultural laborers. For women, it will be things like working as a domestic servant or working in the fields, you know, at harvest time, that sort of thing. So it's a very, very precarious existence. And even before the coronavirus crisis hit, the way I often talk about it, or the way I've articulated it to people, is that these were communities that were on the edge, basically. Very, very, very fragile, very precarious situations, because there's no economic security, there's no employment rights, when people are earning such small amounts of money. So even when people do get work, they would be paid something like 150 rupees a day, which is about £1.50 a day. And what that means is essentially that people earn money and then they're able to buy food. You know, there's no savings, and the people in these communities wouldn't know people who had more money and wouldn't know people who had savings. So what that meant for these communities when the coronavirus crisis hit was that it was a disaster, really. I mean, this photo was taken along with the others on my last trip. And as I said, I had no idea really what was in store for these communities. You know, when I left in February, we started to hear about this coronavirus thing. And I have to admit, I wasn't really sure what to make of it. I don't think any of us could have envisaged what would unfold as a result of that. And I sort of thought, okay, well, maybe something will happen, but it'll last 2 or 3 months, and then probably things will get back to normal in 6 months. And I wasn't really thinking about how it would affect the communities that we work with and the devastating effect that that would have. So just a slight diversion here is part of what I want to communicate really is that all of this work is possible because of relationships and because of connection and because of heart connections with others. And this is a woman that I have a very, very deep heart connection with. So I think it's okay to say this is someone that I love very much, that I really, really care about a tremendous amount, that I respect enormously. She's one of these people that I feel like it's just an incredible privilege to even know someone like this. So this is Meena, who is the founder and director of Nishta, the project that I've been showing you. And she's dedicated her life to uplifting and working in the poorest communities in West Bengal. And she's one of the most remarkable human beings that I've ever met in my life. She's extremely warm, extremely loving, extremely kind, and completely unsentimental. She's just, just wants to solve the problem of poverty and inequality and human beings being degraded. And that's what she does. And she doesn't do anything else. She doesn't have any hobbies. She doesn't have any interests. She doesn't, well, it's not true to say she doesn't have family. She does actually have children that she's adopted, abandoned children that she's adopted. But she doesn't have a family in the formal sense or anything like that. She has a spiritual practice of her own, but she gets up early every morning. And once she's done her meditation and had a cup of tea, she works from something like 6 a.m. till midnight every day. And that's just what she does every day of her life. She's absolutely incredible. And she's somebody that I work very, very closely with as the founder of that organization. Here's a photo of the two of us. She doesn't like having a photo taken. So what happened with this photo was that she was laughing because I was trying to get her to have her photo taken. And then the more I tried to push her into looking at the camera, the more she sort of looked away, and we both ended up just sort of creased up with laughter, basically. So it's a rare opportunity to get a photo of Mina. And this was the two of us on my last visit. And I suppose I'm talking about this because a lot has come out of that relationship and a lot has come out of that connection. And I really love the fact that it's possible to have a very, very deep friendship and a very, very exceptionally good working relationship with a woman who is much, much older than me, from a completely different culture, completely different part of the world. Somehow we've met and we've connected, and much has come out of that connection. The work that Karuna funds with Nishta has really flourished, partly because of the good relationships between us at Karuna and the people in that project. And I just really appreciate that. And I think it's a wonderful thing. So getting back to what we were talking about, I just want to give you like a slight kind of insight into what life is like in that part of the world. So when we talk about rural West Bengal, or when we talk about villages, perhaps those of you that haven't been to India might be thinking something like, I don't know, a cute village in Dorset or something like that. But this is what I mean when I say village life in India. So this would be typical of the sort of villages that people live in Nishta. And this is one of the girls in the project, Aparna, and her stepmom. And this is where she lives. And this is quite typical of those girls. So this would be the sort of dwelling that people would live in. So extremely basic. This is basically just a bamboo hut with some tarpaulin over it. And this is the sort of place where these girls live, is rudimentary huts or very, very rudimentary brick buildings. And there's very little money. And then this next slide is just to talk a bit about what happened with, so setting the scene and saying, this is what the projects were looking like before the coronavirus crisis hit. And then some of you will have seen on the news, there was a reason why I was talking about the parents of these girls being day laborers. And then some of you will have seen on the news about the effects of the lockdown in India. So India went into lockdown fairly early on in the coronavirus crisis, and they were given about 4 hours, basically. I think the Prime Minister came on television and made an announcement and said, okay, in 4 hours, India's going to go into complete lockdown. Now, 93% of people in India, 93% and it's a country of 1.4 billion people, 93% of people work in the informal economy, which means that people are working in jobs, like I've described, basically, where they don't have a contract, they don't get sick pay, they don't get any compensatory pay if they don't work. They have to work in order to eat and to feed their families. And about 100 million of those people are what they call migrant laborers. And when the crisis hit, this was an absolute disaster for all the parents of those girls and for everyone working in the informal economy in India, because suddenly people's livelihood had been taken away and they don't have savings that they can fall back on, and they don't get, they don't get holiday pay, they don't get sick pay. There was no furlough scheme. I mean, it was interesting, my own experience of that time. It was a very strange time, wasn't it? Nobody really knew what was happening in this country. It was very, very hard to really understand how the crisis was unfolding here. And obviously it did have adverse effects for people in this country, but we had the furlough scheme, people had things that they could fall back on. I know it was tough for some people that lost their jobs and so on. But for people in India, it was suddenly like people's livelihoods had just been taken away, and there was a desperate need there that was just closed very, very quickly. And it meant people couldn't work and they couldn't feed themselves. And for migrant laborers, who migrant laborers are people like daily wage laborers who've gone to another state or another town or another city, usually people who've left the rural areas and they've traveled a very long distance. India is a vast, vast country. It takes days to get across it by train. When I lived in India, I once did a train journey from the northern tip of India to the southern tip, and it was 3 days on the train. It's a huge country, and you have they estimate about 100 million people that are in different parts of the country that have gone for work. And suddenly those people were left stranded where they were. So they suddenly had no income. The transport system was shutting down. There were some trains laid on, but people couldn't get access to them because they don't have smartphones. They couldn't get online to book train tickets. And it was an absolute disaster for people. So what you were left with was people stranded, absolutely desperate, and people literally walking home. So sometimes for thousands of kilometers, people were left with no choice but to actually try to make that journey on foot. So this is another image of, so many thousands of families doing this, millions of families probably, just carrying what they had on their head and trying to get back to their home village. And thousands of people died doing this. So that those of you that have been to India will know what it's like at that time of year. I mean, this was, I think, April, May, and it's unbearably hot in India at that time. It's in the mid 40s, sometimes up to about 50 degrees, and people are trying to walk, walk all day in that sort of situation. And people died en route, people met with traffic accidents. It was a terrible, terrible situation. And this is an image of migrant workers being sprayed with disinfectant as well, which was happening up and down the country. So the other thing about this situation is as well, this I appreciate this is quite a distressing image as well, so I apologize for that, but I did just want to show you the reality of what it was like for these people and what the situation was in India there and what it's still like today to a certain extent. There's a lot of police brutality, and people were walking to state lines. So say, for example, you're walking from one state and you want to get home into your next state, and they were actually being held back at the state lines. Or they'd walk for days and days and days or weeks and weeks, and they'd get back to their home village and they were being turned away from their home village because people had fear about contracting the virus. And the police in India can be extremely heavy-handed. So I'll just pause there for a moment and just say a little bit about what Karuna was doing at that time. So it was quite a time for us at Karuna because, we've been working with these communities for a tremendously long amount of time. Some of these organizations we've been working with for like 15, 20 years, and nobody had ever seen anything like this. And most of the partners that we work with were unable to deliver the usual work that they were delivering. And suddenly they were just faced with this massive emergency and this massive crisis. So what we did at Karuna was to launch an emergency appeal, and we managed to raise a huge amount of money. So we raised about £500,000, and we were able to make emergency grants to those partners so that they could distribute what was needed to the communities that they work with. And most of the time that was actually just distributing food. So, the ethos that we had previously had was that we're trying to build infrastructure, we're trying to build confidence, we're trying to help people to invest in their future. And we could see with this crisis that if we didn't actually just respond to the immediate need, that there would be, these communities would just be devastated and there would be no projects left by the time this crisis was over. So we wanted to try and support people on two levels, really. We wanted to try and support the organizations that we work with, and we also wanted to support the communities that they serve as well. So what we did was make grants to the organizations for all their core costs, which meant that they could pay their staff salaries for as long as was necessary. And we're still doing that now. And we also made emergency grants, and we're continuing to make emergency grants to the organizations that we work with so that they can distribute things like food and hygiene kits. And recently we've been working to address the crisis around the breakdown in medical care in India as well. So to begin with, I think in India, what happened was there was it wasn't really the effects of coronavirus that was the problem. It was the effects of lockdown. And it was the fact that communities were unable to work, basically. People were unable to work. And it caused a huge amount of devastation. What we've seen recently is the actual effects of coronavirus. So there's been a second wave in India over the last sort of 6 weeks or so. And it's been much, much, much more severe than the first wave. And that's caused the healthcare system to break down. And you've got communities who are already struggling from the effect of lockdown in the first instance. So we're continuing to support those communities. Just continuing to try and stand with those organizations, basically. And it's interesting, a lot of the organizations that we work with, I was literally just on the phone to Nishta yesterday and talking to Meena and talking with some of her staff members. And just to draw it back to what I was talking about before, what's been very, very helpful for those organizations is the financial assistance that we've been able to provide. So in many cases, it's enabled organizations to survive, and it's enabled organizations to maintain themselves through this crisis so that at the end they can go back to what they were doing and hopefully pick up some of the pieces and begin to rebuild after this crisis. But actually just standing in connection and standing in solidarity with those organizations has meant a huge amount to them. Meena was just saying this to me yesterday. She was saying that people just feel like they've been without hope, that it's been a tremendously difficult time. It's been the toughest time that they've ever faced. And it means a huge amount to them that people are standing with them. And the way that Karuna works is that we're funded mainly by people's individual donations. So I'll say a bit more about how we sort of recruit our donors in a bit. But essentially, we've got thousands and thousands of people who give us a monthly donation. And the organizations that we work with, some of them know this, and they just feel tremendously, well, that sense of connection means a tremendous amount to them, that people that they will never meet over here really care enough to actually give some money each month and to stand with those people. And it means a tremendous amount to them that actually there is that care and that support and that sort of sense of solidarity. Okay, so I've got a little bit more to say and a few more pictures to show, but maybe I'll just pause for a moment there. And I'm aware that some of that's been quite heavy. So in one sense, I apologize for that. And in another sense, you know, that is what's happening. But I'll just pause for a moment and see if there are any questions before I continue or anything anybody wants to say.
I had a question. Gosh, Mitra, I was just thinking, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, yeah.
Do you get overwhelmed? How do you kind of personally cope with, you know, just being in such, you know, a consistent relationship with those individuals and with the things that, you know, those people are going through?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question, Saravantu. I think I would have answered that question very differently about a year and a half ago. You know, I've been doing this sort of work for a long time, and I was never somebody who did particularly kind of get overwhelmed or I still always felt that I was in touch with my feelings around the work, and it wasn't like a sense of being shut off, but I never particularly had a sense of overwhelm. And that changed about 6 months ago. So about 6 months ago, I was, you know, we're working very hard at Karuna. You know, you can imagine that the background to all of this is that we're having to figure out a lot of what we do over and over again on a kind of a regular basis. And you know that from firsthand experience, Saravantu, being a trustee of Karuna. But I think things have been quite difficult for a long time with the communities that we work with. And then, actually, it wasn't about 6 months ago, it was about a year ago. Then in West Bengal, about a year ago, there was a cyclone. And there was a cyclone called Cyclone Amphan. And that hit West Bengal and it hit the Nishta project area really, really badly. And there was about a week when I couldn't get in touch with Meena and I didn't hear anything from anyone at Nishta. And I subsequently found out that was because there was no power there, basically. There was no power, there was no internet, there was no running water. You know, everything was just completely wiped out. And at that point, I experienced sort of overwhelmed for about the first time in my working life, really. And I've been doing this work for about 25 years, and it all just felt a bit much. And it's a funny thing, really, but I sort of thought, oh, this just doesn't, how can I put it? I kind of realized that I had this belief that human beings should only have to endure so much suffering. And I thought, this is just too much on top of everything. It just feels completely ridiculous, really, that there must be a stop somewhere. You can't just keep sort of piling this on top. And at that point, I did feel quite overwhelmed. And I think I came through that, and I've had periods since where it kind of has felt a bit difficult at points. But I think what keeps me going is actually the inspiration of people like Meena. Like what she would say is, you know, okay, yeah, that's fine. Take a little bit of time, experience what you're experiencing. That's perfectly natural. But now we need to get up and we actually need to do something about it. And I think that's sort of, I find that really inspiring. And for me, there's something about the ideal of sort of not tipping over into letting my own feelings interfere with effectively working to try and do our best to remedy the situation. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
Thank you.
And there was a question as well, can you tell us how the girls' squad is coping now? Which is also a very, very good question as well. So the interesting thing about that as well, the interesting thing about that is that how these Karuna funded projects work has, in a quite an interesting way, been incredibly helpful for the response to this crisis. So how these projects work is that they're trying to create networks and trying to create sort of sustainable networks for change in the community. So taking an example of the Nishta project and these girls' squads, because Nishta's been working in that area for some time, there are thousands and thousands of girls and mothers that are extremely well trained and extremely well connected in the community and very, very capable. And they have links with like the local governance structures and the police and the teachers and all of these sorts of things. And those girls' squads were just ready to mobilize. And that's what they've been doing over the last year or so, is they've been supported to make sure that they don't fall behind with their education. So, you know, when schools have been closed, they've been having tuition, and the older girls in the project have been tutoring the younger girls and so on. But they've also put together a massive relief effort. So it's those girls that you see in those photos that have been doing things like distributing food, going from village to village, giving people advice and information, distributing PPE, working with the police, working with teachers, working with what's called the panchayat, which is like the local councils. And yeah, it's them that have kind of led the relief effort, really, which is incredible. There's a question from Alan, and Alan says, how are the men and boys of the families involved? That's a really good question as well, Alan. So they definitely are involved, and I've particularly with Nishta, that would be a good example, and with many, many other of these kind of projects. There's a view, which I think is the right view, that this kind of change, and particularly change around the situation with women and girls, doesn't change until everybody's on board. So the projects work holistically with the whole family. So there'll be fathers involved, there'll be brothers involved as well. When I visited last time, I took part in some fathers groups where fathers were coming together to be educated about the value of girls' education and how to advocate for their daughters. And Nishta is very good at recruiting the men and boys in the community as well. And they're very, very actively involved. It's not always easy to persuade them to begin with. It takes a very long time to sort of change those, norms, really. It's a very, very patriarchal society. But slowly over time, that is starting to change. And there are men and boys that are involved in those changes. And they then influence the other men and boys in the community and become part of that sort of reciprocal system for change. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the last bit of my pictures. Boom, boom. So yeah, as I said, this was taken about a year ago. And on top of the coronavirus crisis, this was a picture that was taken in West Bengal about a year ago, just after Cyclone Amphan had hit. And yeah, Nishta were devastated again by this cyclone. And yet again, last week, there was another cyclone in West Bengal. So things are very, very difficult there and continue to be very, very difficult. And we're continuing to make emergency grants, partly for coronavirus relief work and partly for post-cyclone relief work as well. And in the wake of the first cyclone, we actually started a new project there was a coastal area called Namkhana, which was devastated by this cyclone, and Nishta went there to do relief work, and they found that the number of girls enrolled in school in that coastal region was even less than the project that they were working in. So we've started a new project in that part of the world, working to enroll girls in school and keep them in school, and to work with their families, and to try and rebuild some of the infrastructure that the cyclone has devastated, because it's caused structural damage, and it's also caused a lot of damage to the agricultural sector and farmland's been ruined by saline water. So all of these things Nishta is looking at to try to rebuild. Skip that actually. So I just want to say briefly, it's not a recruitment drive, this talk. I didn't primarily want to come at it from that side, but you might be asking yourself, what can you do? And I'll just talk about that briefly before I just leave a bit more time for questions as well. So yeah, if you want to support Karuna, you can do. You can support us financially. You could set up a monthly direct debit, or you could give us some money as a one-off, and you can do that on our website. And I think we'll be posting that in the chat. The other thing you can do, if you're interested and you have some time, is you could consider doing a fundraising appeal. And I'll just say a little bit about that. So the main way that we fundraise is that we do telephone campaigns, and we do door-to-door fundraising. So Abhayanara, when he was introducing me, was talking about the door-to-door fundraising appeal that we did together. And you might recognize the slightly shifty looking man on the right there, and the slightly shifty looking man next to him. So this was our door-to-door fundraising appeal. So we lived together for 6 weeks. I don't think those appeals are residential at the moment, so people aren't living together at the moment, but we're still doing door-to-door appeals. Each door-to-door appeal has its own little name. It's like you're a band or something for 6 weeks, and we were called the Laughing Ninjas of Fire. And that was us. There was 6 of us, 5 of us there that lived together for 6 weeks. And just going back to this theme about connection, really. It goes all the way through Karuna. It's a thread that goes the whole way through Karuna. Fundraisers connecting with each other, connecting with a deeper sense of themselves, connecting in relationship to each other, and then going out and making connections with the people that whose doors they knock on, or who they speak to on the phone. I remember on this fundraising appeal, a really transformative experience for me, and Abhayanara will probably remember this, was one of the standout experiences I had of knocking on someone's door was this one evening. I knocked on this guy's door, and he opened the door, and I just said to him literally something like, I just said, hello, that was it. I said, hello, how are you? And his opening gambit to me was, it's none of your effing business how I am. And I just thought, okay. And you get lots of training when you're on the appeal, and there's lots about staying in connection with yourself and staying mindful and staying open and being receptive. And I kind of wasn't particularly knocked off balance by what he said. I was just kind of curious. So he said, it's none of your effing business how I am. And I just paused for a moment and I looked at him. I can't remember exactly what I said. I said something like, okay. And then I said, well, okay, so what would you like me to say? How could I do it better? And he said, well, just hello would do. So I said, okay, hello. I said, should we start again? I said, hello. He said, hello. And we got talking. And within a few minutes, he basically told me that, he said, look, I'm just sick of people asking me how I am and not meaning it. And it turned out his wife had died a few months before. And, the poor man was heartbroken. And him telling me that really opened up this beautiful connection between us, you know, that he'd sort of had the courage to make himself vulnerable like that. And he told me about his wife. He was really missing his wife. And then it turned out that one of the things they'd love to do was go to India together, and they'd been on holiday in India several times. And we got talking, and he ended up inviting me around the next day. He said, look, why don't you come around for a cup of tea tomorrow afternoon? And all of this from his initial thing of sort of swearing at me, basically. And I just thought it's sort of typical of the kind of thing that happens when you're doing a fundraising appeal, but it comes back to this thing again of making a connection. And it was a really, really beautiful teaching for me that when we're pushing people away or when we're shut off, you know, that often just comes out of a place of fear, or it comes out of a place of negativity, and completely understandably. And when we can begin to just let that go and let that dissolve and just go into something deeper, there's these wonderful connections that can happen. And anyway, cut a long story short, he ended up signing up to support the charity. I think he gave us £25 a month or £30 a month. And I thought, isn't that lovely, you know, that there's this connection has been made. And this is true of all of our donors, is that the fundraiser makes this connection. You know, that's why people sign up primarily, is because they are very moved by the work that we do, and they make a connection with a fundraiser who comes to their door. And then there's that connection between the fundraiser, and that's then connected to Karuna, who in turn is connected with the project. So say, for example, my relationship with Mina, and that then eventually is this connection with the people who take part in the projects that we fund in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And there's like this chain of connection and this chain of compassion that goes right the way from the people that use those projects. So people like Jaya. And when I say chain of compassion, I don't mean that that's a one-way thing. She brings an incredible amount of care and love to the work that she does with the girls in the project. And that then seems to just form this sort of connection that comes all the way back to us and all the way back to the donor. Yeah, anyway, so that's that. And these are the Laughing Ninjas of Fire. And this is us on, I think this was the last night of the appeal, where we were just enjoying a well-earned ice cream together. So yeah, if you want to find out more or you're interested, you can email me, and the email address is there. Or if you get in touch with Saravanta or Abhayanara, they can pass you on to me as well. So I'll just say a little bit, and then we've got time probably for a couple more questions if people have got more questions. Yeah, just by way of wrapping things up, I was thinking about this today, and I was remembering a conversation that I had with my private preceptor. So the person who ordained me, a few years before I was ordained, we had this lovely conversation, and he was asking me, what are the qualities of the Buddha that I looked up to, or what are the qualities of the Buddha that I responded to? And I remember that conversation very well. And I said to him that for me, it's all about communication and connection. So I feel very, very moved by stories of the Buddha when he's able to connect with absolutely anybody. You know, there are stories of, you know, people like the story of Kisagotami that comes to the Buddha when her child has just died, stories of the Buddha connecting with kings and with, you know, people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And that for me is just a tremendous inspiration, really. So I don't see myself in any way as like, you know, sort of like the lone meditator or the hermit, or and also nor do I sort of see myself as like an activist or someone who's trying to change the world. For me, it's just about making connections and the magic that can come out of that, you know, the beauty and the positive change that can come out of making a connection with another human being, or with making connections with lots of human beings. And yeah, just thinking about what, you know, Saravantu sort of calling this series Living a Dharma Life. For me, that's the most important thing about living a Dharma life, is trying to continually sort of open my heart and just be more and more present in a deeper way. And for me, that's relational. So that happens in relation to other beings. Yeah, and I'll just leave you with a quote, which is, I was looking today actually on our website, Karuna Appeal's website, and there's a very good friend of mine, Sangamani, was talking about why she does Karuna Appeals, and she said this thing which really I thought was very, very beautiful, and I think sort of sums it up really. She said, when the gap between self and other is lessened, anything is possible. When the gap between self and other is lessened, anything is possible. And I think that's very, very true and very, very beautiful. Okay, so we've got a few more minutes. So if there are any more questions, I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, as a treasurer, I suppose one of my preoccupations is with value for money. So if you mentioned the man who gave £25 a month, now in Western terms, that doesn't sound very much. Could you give us some idea of what £25 a month could do in Bengal?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good question, Jairana, and one that I'm very happy to answer, because money goes a very long way in India. So that's one of the beautiful things about people giving here is, say, for example, if you were to give something like £25 a month or £30 a month or whatever it is, quite crudely speaking, I think you could say money's worth something like 7 to 10 times in India what it is here. You know, so an average wage would, you know, for somebody doing a similar job would be something like a tenth of what it is in the UK. And in terms of a project like Nishta, in terms of like practical support, you know, one of the things that they do is pay for school uniforms for the girls, for example. And I think those uniforms cost something like 150 rupees or 200 rupees, which is £1.50 or £2. So, you know, there's things like that. At the moment, with the emergency work that we're doing, we're supplying a lot of just emergency food supplies to families. And to feed a family of 4, 5 or 6 for about a month costs about £15. So money goes a very, very long way in India. It's sort of very good value in a sense. And most of the, you know, you can make a huge difference with quite small amounts of money. I mean, say, for example, the average project that we fund is would be something like £20,000 a year, £25,000 a year, which is really not that much money when you think about it in kind of Western terms. I mean, the Nishta project that I mentioned, they've got 1,000 girls in the project, and we give them about £40,000 a year. You know, and a lot of that is for things like tuition, and it's kind of practical support and some staff costs and so on. So it's a huge amount is achieved with quite small amounts of money. Okay, we've probably got another minute or two if there are any final questions.
I haven't got a question, but it just was really lovely to be reminded through your talk of the time when I was also visiting Meena and Nishta. It's brought back a flood of memories of that, and also quite a few memories of doing a Karuna appeal as well. So thank you. It's kind of opened doors in my own memory, as well as, yeah, kind of doors of connection to lots of people in India who, as you say, I've not met, I'll never meet, but I have a connection with through you, through Karuna. So thank you for, yeah, bringing in a way a lot a lot more people and human lives kind of into our psychic space this evening. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Saravanti. Okay, great. So maybe I'll leave it there. I will put a couple of things in the chat. So if anybody is interested in doing an appeal, I'll put a link to our appeals website. Yeah, and you can also get in touch with me as well. And I think we're going to put a link to the Karuna website as well. But I mean, just to say, mainly what I wanted to do this evening is just to make you aware really of what Karuna does. You know, it's a kind of corner of Triratna that you may not have been aware of. And yeah, I really just wanted to communicate a bit about our work from a personal perspective. And yeah, just thanks so much for inviting me, and really, really lovely to be with you all this evening as well. Okay, so what we might do, I think, is just take a little 5-minute leg stretch, and then we'll come back and we'll do a period of meditation. Yeah, so let's just take a few minutes. So it's 8:40 now, so we can be back at about 8:45 and ready to do some meditation. Okay, so we can set ourselves up in meditation posture, and I'm going to lead us through a period of the Metta Bhavana. So just getting into a posture that's comfortable for you. We're going to sit for about the next 25 minutes or so. We're just closing our eyes when we're ready. And just arriving into our body, feeling the points of contact, the cushion or the mat. And noticing if you're holding on anywhere in the body, if you have tension anywhere, your shoulders or your hands or your stomach. And just letting go of any tension or any holding on. And feeling the body breathing. Noticing how it feels, the in-breath, the out-breath. Seeing if you can have a sense of openness in the heart area. Like you're just opening to the world a little bit more. Metta Bhavana. So just starting with the sense of seeing where we are, seeing what's going on for us, as if we're meeting ourselves. Perhaps there's a sense of well-wishing there for ourselves, or perhaps it's just enough to be however we are, just at peace with ourselves. And noticing what's going on in our mind. Can we allow our minds just to quieten down? Can we allow any self-judgment just to soften? Just being present to our experience. Seeing if you can allow a sense of well-wishing, of metta towards yourself. And then opening to a good friend as we go into the second stage. Bringing to mind a good friend, someone that we're pleased to see. And wishing them well. And then bringing to mind the neutral person. Welcoming them into this sense of metta, well-wishing. Trying to see them as a whole person with a whole life. And not just an incidental character in your own life. And then bringing to mind the difficult person. Seeing if we can still feel a sense of metta and loving kindness towards them. So let's bring to mind everyone that we thought of in the meditation. And just having a sense of metta, a sense of loving kindness amongst us. And then allowing that to flow outwards. Or perhaps we could bring to mind people that are struggling at the moment, people that are in the grip of difficult circumstances. Perhaps some of the people that we've seen this evening, people in different parts of the world. Having a sense of metta towards those people, a sense of well-wishing. That they find the strength they need, the courage they need. And then allowing that to flow outwards to all beings. So just beginning to bring this meditation to a close. And perhaps ending with a heart wish. Just thinking for what you would wish for all beings. That they find peace, that they find happiness. Okay, now I'll hand over to Jayaratna.